Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, which is the second in our series of three, which will be exploring mental health. I'd also like to take the opportunity to say a big thank you to Parabola for their support in helping deliver this series to our members. For those of you that haven't met me before, my name is Rebecca and I'm part of the events team here at the Chamber. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Hayley Chandler from Health in Mind as we look at supporting others. As we're all aware, the coronavirus pandemic has caused exceptionally challenging and worrying times for each and every one of us. The effects of social distancing, lockdown, the loss of loved ones, and the virus, and the overconsumption of stress-inducing media reports is taking a huge toll on our mental health and well-being. Consequently, the Chamber felt it was part of our role to support the Edinburgh business community with their health and well-being at this time. And part of that is supporting others. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass over to Hayley, who's going to take us all through today's session.
So welcome. It's nice to see you all. I'm going to be talking to you about supporting other people today. So it's just a bit of guidance about being one person who is supporting another person through a difficult time. And I know you might all be thinking about this more in a work role, but I think it's all quite applicable to just life in general. So it might be helpful for your personal lives as well. So my role at Health in Mind, I've been there for 7 or 8 years now. I've had quite a few different roles there. I'm currently the Peer Collaborative Coordinator, as it says up there. So the Peer Collaborative is a network for peer workers in Edinburgh. So peer workers are people who have lived experience of mental health challenges and recovery, and they then intentionally use that experience of recovery to accompany other people through theirs. So some peer workers are in paid roles, many are in volunteer roles. And as a part of this, as a part of my job, I spend quite a lot of time in peer spaces and in peer support spaces, which means I see a lot of non-mental health professionals support other people and support each other all the time. And I see them being really, really good at it. So I'm very aware that you don't have to be a mental health professional to support another person with their mental health. Oh, sorry, I've just had something come up in the chat. So as I'm sure you're all aware, mental health and mental health difficulties, it's a lot more prominent, has become a lot more prominent in society in general over the last few years. And certain elements of mental health difficulties are becoming better understood by the general public and becoming destigmatized, especially conditions where anxiety and depression are a prominent feature. And there's also obviously been some work into suicide prevention. In my experience of supporting people and talking to people about the support that they get with their mental health, most support that people get for their mental health is not done by professionals, it's actually done by people in the person's life. So those people might be at work, or they might be at home, they might be their family, and they might be their friends, but that's the main source of support for most people. So I'm going to go on to what we're here for, how we can support other people with their mental health. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is notice that they might need some extra support. So the sort of things that you might notice, firstly, a change of appearance. So have you sort of noticed maybe signs of neglect, like the person maybe isn't washing as much or not taking as much care of their appearance as they maybe used to? There might be a change in how they react to stress or to other people. So perhaps somebody's become quite short-tempered or lost their sense of humour, whereas previously, you know, they weren't like that. Or a person might have become quite withdrawn. I think the key element here is that there's a change in the person. You know, like if somebody has always been a little bit scruffy, then, you know, that's not something to necessarily worry about. It's more if somebody wasn't before and now they are. I do appreciate it's quite difficult to tell at the moment because people have changed the way they dress and the way that they are and the way that we are with other people. You know, we obviously haven't had much choice in whether we withdraw or not. So I do appreciate it's hard to tell if it's because a person is struggling or because of the general situation, but that makes it more important that we just ask people how they're doing. And it might be worth just doing that as a standard at the moment, especially at the moment, or maybe in general. I don't know what the what the general practice is at your workplaces, but in mental health, so where I work, we have supervision as a standard. So we meet with our managers once a month to discuss not just our work, but also like how we are and how we're feeling within our works. It's obviously very important to what we do, but I think, you know, I think it's good practice just in general when people are checking in with staff to be asking them how they're doing. And obviously many people are likely to be struggling at the moment, so yeah, so it's doubly important to be asking. I guess I've put up some prompts there to sort of help in terms of like how you might ask a person. So you might ask, you know, obviously, are you okay? You might point out some of the things you've noticed. So obviously, you know, nicely. So, you know, maybe I've noticed you were a bit short with so-and-so in that meeting the other day. That's not usually like you. You know, do you want to talk about anything? You know, or just would you like to talk? Do you need to talk? I think the important thing is we're not forcing people to talk to us. It's an invitation for them to talk. And if the person turns you down and says no, then perhaps just try and leave a door open for them. So you might say, okay, that's fine, but if you do change your mind, you know, you can speak to me. But also at the same time, don't necessarily take their first answer, because obviously it's quite normal for people, you know, when asked, how are you, to say, I'm fine, when they're not fine at all. So if you don't think somebody's fine, yeah, maybe something like I've noticed, etc. So if the person does agree to speak to you, they would like to talk, I guess you would try and put it in their court a little bit. So find out where they would like to speak. I know, again, it's difficult at the moment. We might not have as many options as we usually have, you know, but do they want to talk on Zoom? Would they prefer to talk on the phone? Do they want to talk now? Would they not, you know, if it's possible, would they like to sort of take a socially distanced walk to talk about it? So give them some sort of control over where and how you talk and when. Some people are better able to talk to people face to face, looking you in the eye, and other people much prefer to do it side by side, perhaps while doing another activity. I believe there's research to say that that's somewhat gendered, which is why like some men's support services tend to be focused around activities. Apparently men prefer to talk like side by side, women face to face, but you know, that is a massive generalization. We're all individuals. So I would just take your cue from the person and see how they're more comfortable speaking to you. So once your person has agreed to talk to you, it's important that we listen. And we assume that listening is a skill that's easy, but actually lots of people really, really struggle with it. So I've got a question here of, when we're supposed to be listening, what do we sometimes often do instead? So I'm going to move your picture so I can actually see you and try and find I might just go back to the main screen for a minute, because this is your chance to go into the chat, perhaps. Oh no, I don't have a chat. Oh, yes, I do. There we go. So now's your chance to get a bit involved. What sort of things are you sometimes doing when you're supposed to be listening instead of listening? You might say in person, or you can put it in the chat if you like. Talking, definitely. Any other suggestions? Oh, worrying about the implications of what they're telling you. Yeah, definitely getting like stuck in our own worries and thoughts. It's another one. Any others before I go back? Thinking about what you're going to say next. Definitely. Similar to what you guys have been saying. So some of the things we often do instead of listening when we're supposed to be listening. So we might be looking at our phone or our laptop or the TV. And at the moment, it's even easier, or checking our emails. You know, when a lot of things are happening over Zoom at the moment, it's even easier to be doing other things. And, you know, we think we look like we're present, but people can often tell that we're maybe not fully present. We might be thinking about what's for dinner, about our next appointment, about things we've forgotten to do, like, you know, if we've left the house, like, oh God, do I turn the oven off? We might be thinking about our own concerns and stories. We might be consumed by our own feelings, especially feelings that are maybe coming up about what the person is saying. And as you said, we often talk when we're supposed to be listening. And so this is actually, I wanted to make a point that one of my volunteers made to me at one point. He sort of observed that a lot of the mental health campaigns often focus on the idea that it's good to talk and people should talk, and that's true. It does really help with our mental health for us to talk, but for it to work, somebody needs to be listening, and that's sort of where we come in as the supporters. So for listening, how can we be better at it? So in mental health, and probably in lots of other spaces as well, we talk about active listening. So this is where you're listening intently and making the effort to understand the person when they're speaking. And so some of the things this might involve would be putting away or turning off any distractions. So, you know, put your phone in your pocket, turn off emails, you know, have the TV and radio off while you're supposed to be listening to the other person. It's really important to resist the urge to give advice and opinions in your own story. Just sort of try and be aware if you've got the urge to do that, but hold it back. It can be really helpful. I guess this sort of comes into responding as well, which is what I'll, you know, go on to next. But it can help with your listening sometimes to reflect back a bit and ask for any clarifications if you need them. Because if you're following the story better, then you're more likely to be listening properly if rather than getting lost in thoughts of like, oh, I don't really know what they're saying. And especially because when people are struggling, their stories can sort of jump all over the place a little bit. Their way of thinking might not be like linear and easy to follow. So sometimes like helping to like tease out the bits of the stories can help you with your listening. I think it's important to accept that listening can be uncomfortable. Especially if what the person's saying makes you feel uncomfortable, like it makes you feel sad or it makes you feel angry, you know, that's okay. And also that it can be difficult for all the reasons I was just saying. And sort of both of those things tie into the idea that it's about trying to let go of your own thoughts. So, because another sort of line of thought that we can end up getting stuck in, as well as sort of the worries and what you guys were saying in the chat, is when we do notice that we're not listening, it's easy to get lost in oh, why wasn't I listening? I'm such a bad person, I'm terrible at this. But then we're still not listening to the person, we're just still lost in our own thoughts. So, you know, that's fine. If any of you practice mindfulness, like that's a great practice for this skill. You know, you just notice what you've done and then you let it go without judgment and bring yourself back to what you're supposed to be doing, which is listening to the other person. A TED talk that I would really recommend that could help you with this is 10 Ways to Have a Better Conversation by Celeste Headley, which is what it sounds like. But there's a great bit in it that I love in her talk where she sort of puts to the audience, you know, what sort of things do you think make you look like you're listening, or look like you're paying attention, and people, you know, say all the things that the research says, like, you know, make eye contact and mirror the person's body language and, you know, repeat key phrases back to them. And her response to that is there's no reason to show that you're paying attention if you are in fact paying attention. Like, you will look like you're paying attention. So I think that's great advice. That's the one I tend to go with, and that's the one I sort of share with my volunteers and peer workers, in terms of like how to pay attention to people, how to look like you're paying attention to people. Another resource I love is a book it's actually a children's book, and I very often use it in my training. And people look at me like, I can't believe you're about to bring out a children's book. I can't whip it out right now because it's actually like stuck in the office, where I'm not and haven't been for a while. So, but it's a book called The Rabbit Listened. I've forgotten the name of the author, but I'm sure if you Google it or put it into Amazon, you'll find it. So it's so it's a children's book, and in it the little boy, like the main character, sort of knocks over his blocks and he's upset, and all the animals come along one by one to try and help him. And you know, so one comes along, the kangaroo comes along and she tries to fix it, and he sends her away because he doesn't want to fix it. And another one comes along and says, oh, let's get angry, this is terrible, and he doesn't want to get angry and sends them away. And another one wants to get revenge, and you know, and so on and so on. And then finally the rabbit comes along and just sits with the little boy, and the little boy tells his story, and he, you know, goes through the process for himself of wanting to fix things and being angry and, you know, wanting to get revenge. And I think, yeah, it's just such a great example, this book, of like of the importance of listening and the importance of letting people go through that process themselves, and of us not just jumping straight into roles where we're telling people they should fix it or they should get angry and what they should do, because they really need to do that for themselves. And also, I think it helps us to be aware that a lot of the time when we're maybe sort of stepping into these fixing roles or angry roles, these roles where it's not about the person anymore, it's become about us. We are often doing it with good intentions, you know, because we genuinely are angry for the person, you know, if they've been mistreated, or we do want to fix things for them so that they cannot be in pain. But that's often not helpful to step straight into that role. So just to try and like step back from it, like personally, I know I'm somebody that wants to fix people. I guess that's why I'm in the job that I'm in, but I need to be aware that that's something that I have a tendency towards, and stop myself from doing it, because it's not helpful for people and they need support. So the next stage, you won't be surprised to find out, is responding. So I'm just firstly going to get out of the way some unhelpful phrases that people often use when they're trying to be helpful. These are often not coming from bad places. The people usually are trying to help the other person. But yeah, like I said at the beginning, I spend a lot of time in peer spaces. So I hear a lot from people about what isn't helpful for them in terms of their mental health. And yeah, these ones are some classics. So pull your socks up is one, a classic. It could be worse. It's all going to turn out fine in the end. Worst things happen at sea. The exact same thing happened to me. You should go and have a bath, or go for a run, or eat some kale. It sounds, people, we feel like we're giving good advice when we say these things. We feel like we're helping, but it can, the person may feel like you're sort of minimizing or dismissing them, or giving sort of unwanted advice, or maybe advice that isn't appropriate for them, or they're not ready to hear yet. So I would sort of stay away from those responses. So what can be helpful when you're responding to people? So firstly, this is why I did such a lengthy version of The Rabbit Listened. Try not to shut down the conversation with fixing or humour or anger. So just to make a point actually on humour can be helpful, but if it's helping the person to relax and to keep speaking, and I guess it depends on your relationship with that person, so whether you know that humour would be appreciated in that moment, because even if it usually would be appreciated, it might not be when the person's really struggling and trying to be serious. The important thing is, if you are using humour, as long as it's being used to like keep the conversation flowing rather than to shut it down because you feel uncomfortable. And you might not be aware that that's why you're doing it, but it often, I think, is why people sort of turn to humour, is because they feel uncomfortable and they want it to stop. But the person needs to speak, that's why they're speaking. So yeah, so try not to stop the conversation. Uncomfortable silences can be okay. And I think I always try and let an uncomfortable silence go like a little bit more, count a few on from when I've stopped feeling comfortable with it, because firstly we want the other person to step into the uncomfortable silence and not do it ourselves, but also we don't know the other person does feel uncomfortable. Maybe a bit of silence is fine, maybe they're gathering their thoughts, and if it is uncomfortable, that's all right. Worse things happen. And I'm not supposed to say that's one of the bad responses, but anyway. So it's important to acknowledge how the person's feeling. So sort of validating their feelings. So you might not agree with the thoughts that they're having. You know, if the person's being very self-critical of themselves, they're like, you know, sort of angry at another person and you feel like it's a bit unreasonable, you might not agree with that, but whether they're, you know, they might not agree with it either. Like at a later date, they might see that their thoughts maybe weren't what they would usually be thinking, but their feelings are real. You know, what they're feeling right now is real, and it's important to validate that. So, you know, acknowledge they are feeling angry, they are feeling upset, they are feeling anxious. That is how they're feeling, and that's okay. That's true to them. So I guess the next thing is about being curious. So, you know, sort of similar to when I was talking about with the listening, about trying to like tease out the story, but also, yeah, so do ask questions so that you've got the full picture of what the person's trying to say to you. But it's also about not tipping over into being intrusive. So if a person seems to want to let a certain part of the conversation go, you know, let it go. That's fine. I think it's really important to acknowledge the strength that the person is showing, and to give a bit of feedback to show that you see that in the person. So, and you know, the classic one, and it is true, it's not just you know, something we roll out. If a person's sharing if they're speaking about their mental health with you and they're sharing how they feel, like, that's a really brave thing to do. It's not something we typically do in our society. So I think it's important to acknowledge that they're doing a really brave thing, that by speaking to you about how they're feeling and what they're thinking. So acknowledge that. At this point, it might be okay to share some of your own experience. I know I said previously, it's, you know, to resist giving advice. In peer work, we sort of talk about framing it in terms, you know, always frame it in terms of like, this is what helped me. So rather than saying, you know, you must go to a yoga class, it's going to fix you, everything's going to be great when you go to yoga, framing it more in terms of like, I go to yoga, I find that really helpful, and just plant that seed for the person, and they can accept it or not. It, you know, it is, the ball is in their court there. It's about sort of handing over, giving that control over to people for them to take for themselves. And also encouraging the person to consider what they think might be helpful for them. Yeah, and just it being led by the person as much as possible. And again, this is like a crucial part of peer work, which is the type of mental health work that I do, or that I work around. It's about the person being able to see their own strengths and their own solutions, and sort of supporting the person as much as possible to be able to do that. And generally, I think recovery needs to come from the person as much as possible. It's great to be there to support them to do it, but they're going to have to be the ones driving it. So yeah, but ultimately, I guess you're just trying, when you are responding and listening also, you're just trying to get across that message that this is a person, the person is worth listening to, they're worth being interested in, their thoughts and feelings matter, because obviously when people are feeling low, so obviously, I'm guessing obviously to your, you know, we don't believe that about ourselves. You know, we don't think we're worth listening to or being interested in, or that we have anything to say that anyone would want to hear. So as the person who's there supporting that person, it's about getting across the message that they are. So at this point, you know, you've noticed the person isn't doing so well, you've asked them about it, they've spoken to you, you responded a bit, so you know you've had this conversation, and it might be at this point that you're done. And that's what the person needed, is to be listened to and to talk a bit, and they might sort of take the rest of it forward themselves. But you might want to support the person with the next steps. So the sorts of things a person might be doing next after this conversation is finding out what help is available to them. You might support them around finding out, learning a bit more about what they're experiencing, you know, if this is a brand new experience. And I think right now that's especially likely to be true for a lot of people. I think people that have never experienced or never recognized that they've experienced anxiety and depression, especially before maybe experiencing it now, you know, with the sort of change that we've all had to our lives. so learning a bit about that. You might support them to make a plan for like what they want, some steps that they want to take next. And you might support them to seek professional support if that's like what they feel like would be helpful for them. So whether that's the GP, whether that's going to a mental health organisation, or yeah, those would be sort of your obvious next first steps. And you might support them to take some action, so to do something that will help them to feel a bit better. So the sorts of places that people can go. So for example, if they're learning, for most of those things actually, so any research person you might be supporting the person with, the sort of places you can go are Edspace, and there's going to be a page next coming up, don't worry, where I write all these down. So Edspace is an information website which has information on all the organisations that provide mental health support in Edinburgh. It's going to be called iThrive soon because we're moving. I won't go into all of that. That's a whole other long story, but it's going to be changing name. There's the Mental Health Information Station, which ordinarily used to meet on Thursdays. I believe it was like 12 till 3, and it was at Palmerston Place, just in the west end of Edinburgh. And you can go and you can sort of speak to people, go and speak to people like workers from the NHS. They can speak to peer workers. They can get information on services. They do have, while they obviously can't meet in person at the moment, they are still available to like help people find information about sort of resources in Edinburgh. So again, if you just Google Mental Health Information Station Edinburgh, you will find them. GPs are obviously often a good source of information. Some GP surgeries also have link workers who are workers who can help link a person into community services in the community. So you can see them for like more, like I think it's up to 4 times usually, and they have a bit more time to spend with you because obviously GP appointments tend to be quite short. So if you need to like explore it with a person and you're lucky enough to have a surgery that has a link worker, I would make use of them. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention peer support groups, because obviously that is my business, but they're genuinely like amazing sources of knowledge. Like, you know, instead of one person sitting in front of you telling you what they know, you'll have like 20 people sitting in front of you telling you what they know, and they can often also tell you like which ones they've used and which ones they liked best and which ones they didn't like. So they can be, yeah, peer support groups are a great source of information on the services that are available, and also being able to tell you which services they actually liked using. I'd say it's really important to encourage the person to keep their next steps simple, because if they are struggling, then sort of giving multiple options or taking an approach of, you know, I'm just going to go fix my entire life right now, is likely to feel overwhelming, and it could just be like something that feels like another failure. So, you know, maybe have 1 or 2 things that the person feels will be helpful, encouraging them to sort of do 1 or 2 things that they thought would be helpful for their mental health, and just do those first and then think about the rest later. And I think it's also really important to keep being there for the person, you know, once they have opened up to you, and that, you know, and spoken about the sort of struggles they're experiencing. It might be quite distressing to then feel, even if it's not how it actually is, but to feel dropped in any way. So if it sort of depends on obviously the relationship that you have with that person, and the sort of ongoing relationship you're able to have. But even if it's like an email to sort of check in with them, or a text to check in with them and see how they're getting on, I think it can be really important to let the person know you're still thinking about them, and maybe arranging to see them again, or keep in touch in some way afterwards. So I think the next thing that can be so important, especially if you're going to be supporting a lot of people in general in your workplace, or you're going to be supporting a specific person in a more ongoing way, it's really important to understand what the person is going through, if you don't feel like you do understand properly. So there's a lot of, the internet is obviously a fantastic source of information. There's lots of information on there. There's also a lot of questionable information on the internet, obviously, I'm sure we all know. So I would start somewhere reputable, especially if, you know, sort of information mental health is reasonably new to you. So I've put down some websites here that I think are a good starting place for you. So I've already mentioned EdSpace, so that, which is going to be iThrive. And that would probably be most appropriate if you're trying to find out what services are available for people to use that could help them with their sort of ongoing support and their ongoing mental health needs. The Mental Health Foundation have lots of great information sheets on lots of different topics related to mental health, and you can sort of print them out as really handy PDFs. So they might be good ones to sort of have in the workplace to sort of email to people, or you know, when we're able to do print copies and give to people again, to have some available. So things, you know, like sleep and keeping active and just sort of the basics of mental health, they have a lot on that. See Me Scotland, so they do a lot of anti-stigma work, but obviously as part of that do have a lot of information. Mind also have lots of great information, and Blurt, they're probably more relevant to depression, but that's obviously a very common experience in terms of people's mental health difficulties. So I think they're a really good one for like short information sheets on the sort of different aspects of depression, just so you can understand it a bit better. And from a workplace perspective, I think most of those websites also have like information that are relevant to workplaces. So they have sort of plans around, I know like mine, for example, have something called a WAP, it's a work action plan, which is a sort of structure for looking at a person maybe who's coming back to work having had mental health difficulties, and the sort of things that you might have that you would both agree upon that you would have in place for them to come back. I believe like See Me and Mental Health Foundation have similar tools as well. So yeah, they're also worth looking at from a work perspective. Excuse me. Some books that you might find helpful. So I really love the Matt Haig book, Reasons to Stay Alive. I think it's a really great portrait of what anxiety and depression can feel like. I mean, obviously they're quite unique experiences. This is like one person's experience of it, but it's sort of quite short and simple. So yeah, if you wanted to read a book on it, that's a really good one. If you want to do some more in-depth reading around mental health, the Bessel van der Kolk Body Keeps the Score is like a fantastic book about trauma, and while it is academic, it's actually very accessibly written. So if you really want to get stuck into mental health writing, I would recommend that one. It's really good, and it's just sort of around the effects of trauma. On the subject of trauma, there's a really good online video. So I think it's produced for the NHS, and it's sort of aimed at NHS workers. But given that lots of workplaces, it's important, well, just all spaces in general where people go, it's important for places to be trauma informed and to be aware that lots of people are coping with the effects of trauma, and a lot more people than we realise are coping with the effects of trauma in society. That's a really good video. So I haven't got the link there, but again, if you just Google Opening Doors, Trauma-Informed Practice in the Workforce, it's about 15 minutes. It's worth a watch. And finally, if you would like to do some training or think about getting some training into your workplace, Scottish Mental Health First Aid is a great one. It's what it sounds like. It's a first aid course, but for your mental health. So for like first responders if somebody's having a mental health crisis, like the sort of steps that they can take in that scenario. So I just also wanted to talk about if you feel like somebody is at risk of suicide. I'm not going to go, don't worry, I'm not going to go too in depth here because I'm aware this can be quite a difficult subject for people to hear about, but I think it is really important, obviously, in the context of mental health. And the steps you would take around it are incredibly similar to what we've just talked about. So the first thing you'll be doing is you'd be assessing the risk, and you know, if you're having the conversation with the person, if you feel like they may be at risk of suicide, the important next step, you know, if there's things that they've said that have like has given you questions, the important thing then is to ask the question, you know, are you considering suicide? Have you been thinking about suicide? It's really important that the question is asked in an unambiguous and direct way. So, you know, one of the common ways that people ask is like, are you thinking about doing something silly? You know, and it's because and I know people ask it because they feel awkward asking it more directly, but the person might not know what you mean, and it's easy to evade that question. Also, I always thought, are you thinking about taking your own life, was quite a straightforward way of asking, but I was told at my most recent mental health first aid training that actually it's not, and for some people they might not understand that question, so it is best to ask the person if they have been thinking about suicide. So I do appreciate it is really difficult. I also personally try and stay away from the phrase commit suicide. That's more stigma related, because obviously the commit part of it is in relation to, it used to be a crime. So not in Scotland actually, but more in England and Wales, but that sort of stigma around it is still caught up in the language. So that's personally why I try and avoid that phrase, but I appreciate in common language, lots of people say it, they understand it, what it means. So that's up to you really, if how you want to say that. And then, like I said, again, it's very, very similar to everything we've just been talking about. So while you're listening, just try not to panic. And I'm aware that if you do have any kind of duty of care for the person, that you may need to take some action, and it's a good thing to be upfront about action that you might need to take. But I would also discourage you from, you know, if you say, I'm going to have to fill out some paperwork because the person has disclosed that they're thinking about suicide, I wouldn't sort of take out the forms there and then. If you can help it, just focus on listening to the person, listening to what it is that they have to say. And just actually one more thing I'd like to say around asking the question and any anxieties you might have around that. You can't put the thought in somebody's head. If it's there, it was already there. So, and you can't, like, people aren't that suggestible. They wouldn't start thinking about it just because you mentioned it. You know, yeah, again, so you have this, after you're sort of listening, you're responding. It's all the same principles I've been talking about already. When you're in terms of seeking further support, it really depends on what feels appropriate after the conversation. I would say you probably need to help the person seek some support if this is something they've been considering. So obviously, if you feel at immediate risk, then 999 or the crisis centre will be able to help you. But you might also want to make sure that the person has people that they can speak to, like the Samaritans, like Breathing Space. They can also phone the crisis centre. So I've put all those numbers up there for you. I think they can be very handy to have to hand if you feel like you're going to have a conversation where this might be something this might be information you have to give to the person. And if you feel like you would like further information and training on this topic, I've already, so it is covered in the Scottish Mental Health First Aid training that I mentioned before. There's also chooselife.net, and they do different trainings around this. So I think Suicide Talk is the shortest version of it. There's Safe Talk, which is a half-day training, and Assist, which is a 2-day training. So it sort of depends on how adept people need to be with having these conversations, like how likely they are to happen. And actually, like a resource that we found fairly recently, that we've been using fairly recently, Health in Mind, is one called zerosuicidealliance.com. It's actually an online training, only takes 20 minutes to do. I think it's really user-friendly, and I find it really helps take some of the anxiety around these conversations out of it. So I would, yeah, I thought that one was a really good one. It might be worth having a look at that website if this is something you'd like to feel a bit more confident around. And then, finally, if you are supporting people, the last thing to be considering is your self-care. Because, and especially if you're going to be supporting people a lot, or if it's going to be ongoing, or even just if you have found it really draining and really difficult, it's important to look after yourself. So the sorts of things you might do, obviously, talking, you know, this has all been about how important it is to talk and how helpful having somebody listen to you can be. So I appreciate it's probably not a good idea to be saying, you know, to talk to someone who maybe knows the person you've been talking to. or you might need to think about confidentiality when you are talking. And there's also, there's always the Samaritans for yourself as well, or breathing space for yourself. Like you can also access those things if you really need to get things off your chest after you've been supporting another person, if it's been difficult. So, but please do talk to people if you need to. Moving can be so helpful if you're literally trying to shake off the day. So whether that's dancing or running or yoga, just get your body moving and kind of get it out of you. Having a bath or a shower, and lots of people swear by literally just washing the day off of them when they've had, when they've had to have difficult conversations and they've had to have upsetting conversations. Hugging someone you love, if you've got somebody sort of available close by, hug the cat if they're there, or the dog. Yeah, I know that can be difficult again right now, but if that is available to you, then do. Or making your favourite dinner, or if you're the person you've been hugging can cook that favourite dinner for you, then fantastic. But ultimately, it's true what they say about empty cups. So if you are going to be supporting others, it is really, really, really important that you are also looking after yourself while you are doing it. And that is the end of supporting other people. I hope that was helpful for you all. I think we've got a little bit of time for Q&A.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Hayley. That was a really good overview. I think it is such a sensitive topic and many of us don't know how to approach it. Having that easy sort of step-by-step process kind of makes it feel a lot more comfortable going into it. And a lot more supported, so thank you so much for that. I know we have had a question in the chat, so if the person was considering suicide and they are an employer and have a duty of care, is referring them to help enough?
I mean, I don't know it from a legal perspective. I've got to say I'm not 100% sure. I think from a personal perspective, I think I would sort of want to make sure they got that. I guess it depends on how intent the person is on it. It's hard to sort of say in a very theoretical scenario. If somebody is considering it, but they don't feel like they're in immediate danger, then, sort of maybe agreeing with the person that they're going to make an appointment to speak to their GP now, and they're going to make an appointment to see their GP imminently and go and speak to them about it. Sorry, I've knocked my stuff off the table. That might be enough, but if you feel like a person is at risk soon, I would probably want to sort of go with them or phone the crisis centre there and then with them. So it's hard to give a really definitive answer because it really depends on when if you feel like the risk is now and sort of present now. Sorry, that wasn't a very good answer.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, go on, Alan.
I was just going to say, no, that was good, Hayley. Thanks very much for that. It's something that we need to consider further, but yeah, thanks.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments or observations that they want to share? No, I have a question. So this is partly could be used in business, but also in personal life. If you are maybe got say you're having a catch up with a colleague or something, and you have an appointment, maybe it's an hour that you've put in the diary and you have a meeting straight after it. Obviously, you're saying about how to not shut it down and continue it on, but what if you actually do get to a point where you do need to shut it down, but you want to keep the door open so that they can come back at another time? How would you approach that?
I would just be upfront about it, and obviously we have that all the time in our jobs. I think just being open from the beginning of this is how much time we've got together. So if you're sort of becoming aware that you've got about 15 minutes to go, I think it might be worth reminding because they might not be aware of the time. Just sort of say, look, I'm so sorry, I am going to have to go to this next appointment, but is at this time. But is there anything we can can we agree to meet sort of tomorrow or next week to discuss this further, or is there anything we can and maybe start moving on the conversation to the let's agree on some next steps stage, if you sort of know you're not going to have much more time. And then similar to my previous answer, I guess if you're really, really, really concerned for the person and you feel like you're going to have to go somewhere with them, then obviously the next appointment might have to get cancelled. But in, you know, the vast majority of cases, that's not going to be the case. Yeah. So I think just being able to get through the whole process of like agreeing some next steps before they walk out of the door is important.
Perfect, thank you. Lorraine, you've got your hand up. Do you want to come in and ask your question?
There we are. Thanks very much. I found that really interesting and thought-provoking. My question is just about, I find the things that you've talked about very helpful kind of from a peer perspective and a personal perspective, but in a kind of employment setting, I feel like it's a bit more fraught, in the sense that you know, you don't want to overstep any boundaries, and you're also, you know, you're kind of dependent on each other to an extent, and we're all going through a difficult time at the moment. So yeah, I don't know, I was still thinking about like, how would I apply this without feeling, as an employer, like that people didn't feel that I was kind of encroaching upon them. Have you got any suggestions?
Yeah, and I think that is why it's important that, like I was saying at the beginning, that it is an invitation to people, and also that you're realistic all the way through, and I guess open with the person about how much support you are able to give. Like if you know you can't give lots of support, you know, ongoing support to the person, then I guess sort of getting that across, maybe not too bluntly at the beginning, but getting that across from the beginning, because, you know, it could equally maybe be a bit damaging if you're sort of setting expectations that you're going to support them, you know, through everything, if actually you don't have the capacity and it's not appropriate within your role. And yeah, I think this is more how to have a good conversation in this sort of one sitting, perhaps, and then, you know, like I was saying, in the terms of like checking in afterwards, you would consider like how you would be able to do that, and again in a way that sort of fits with your role and fits with the time that you have and what you're able to do and what's appropriate to your relationship with the person. You know, it might be that you can meet with the person once a week and have a coffee and do this again, or it might just be that you'll be like checking in with them by email, like sort of once a fortnight, just say how you getting on, hope you're doing well. And it might literally be as much as that, just to sort of show you're still thinking about them. You know, you're not taking on the role here of being this person's, like the person's personal support worker, just being like one person listening to another person, and then helping them to work out what they need to do to get that ongoing support. But you don't need to be that ongoing support necessarily. You're sort of supporting them in this moment.
What about if they feel that, say for example, they have anxiety and there's an element of the work that they feel contributes to their anxiety, but it's part of the work that you do? Like, how do you manage that sort of tension?
I mean, I guess that comes
feedback or things like that, where they find that difficult experience.
So in that case, like some of the tools I mentioned, that some of the websites on the sort of second or third to last page might be helpful, like the WAP one I mentioned, the work action plan, because maybe that might help enable a conversation where you can work out, well, what is possible and what isn't possible in terms of like making this particular task like less anxiety inducing. I mean, ultimately, I suppose with sort of reasonable work adjustments, it is about them being reasonable, you know, but that would be sort of, I guess, more for you to sort of look at in terms of your roles and have a think about. Yeah, but even if a person still needs to do a certain task, like maybe there are ways to make it less anxiety provoking. And I think that, again, that's why it's important to be having conversations with people, because it's until you sort of explore it, it's hard to know like what actually is it about the task that's causing the anxiety, because it might not be the whole task, it might be like a very specific part of it that there is something you might be able to do about, like together. But also I think it's about both people sort of taking responsibility. Like in peer work, so we have peer work values, and one of the values is responsibility, and the idea is that everybody has to sort of share that responsibility, including the person who's being supported.
Thank you, that's really helpful. We get access to the slides and things with the links afterwards.
I can share them afterwards. Yeah, that's totally fine.
Sure.
One other thing that I've witnessed various different businesses doing, and especially with the coronavirus pandemic, is having a mental health sort of person in the workplace. So just the same way that you'd have a first aider or a fire warden, is actually businesses are starting to ask their employees, is there anyone that would quite like to be that person that is there for people to go to? And I think one of the benefits of that is it sometimes does kind of break that, it has that relationship there, so you don't just feel like, oh, I'm bothering my manager. You're actually going to the person whose role it is and whose responsibility it is to support that. So a lot of places are actually the same way as you appoint a fire warden or a first aider is appointing mental health, and then it means that that one person can also be invested in to train them up. But obviously it is, like we've discussed, it is quite a large responsibility, but there's some people that maybe, like Hayley said, you know, she likes to help people, so it might be that there's someone in the workplace that would actually be like to be that person that people can come to. So that's maybe something else to consider and putting into your workplace going forward, because I know a lot of businesses have done that as well. And I can put anyone in touch as well to find out how they went about selecting people, and doing that as well. We can connect you through the chamber as well, so you can speak to how it works in practice.
The Scottish Mental Health First Aid training would be the one I would assume those people would be doing.
Yeah.
And it's a 2-day training course that they can attend on like how to respond, to these kind of conversations.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments they want to ask Hayley? Yeah, Alistair?
Can I ask a question, kind of following on from those last couple of points? We're in a very fortunate position, I suppose, given current circumstances, to be looking to actually recruit a few people in the next month or two. And I'm interested, from my perspective, when I've seen issues in the past, it's often things that have escalated unnoticed or been not hidden, but, you know, have not been talked about until things come to a bit of a crunch point. And although I agree with the point you made earlier, you're not wanting to necessarily be everyone's personal support worker. It's like, what, is there anything beyond, you know, I would like to think we've given the impression before of we do talk about these things at work, and I would like to think it's an open environment. But is there anything that you would recommend that kind of signals that to particularly new joiners at this point in time, where you've got, you know, the stress of a new job and you're worried and you've got your confidence issues or whatever, you know? Is there anything that, other than saying we are open and talking about these things, that you found particularly helpful in work environments that encourage people to not let things escalate to a point where it's at a crunch point?
I mean, I know in my workplace, for example, I feel like supported and I can talk about things as you would hope, you know, given I work for a mental health charity. But I think a big part of that is that I do have, you know, we have support and supervision, which I know isn't standard across all workplaces. So if it isn't, maybe having something that's like that, like even if it's like going out for a coffee with your manager, or, you know, having a Zoom chat with a coffee at the moment, at like a set point, and where it is a sort of set part of that conversation to, you know, to ask how the person is and how they're doing, and just see, more holistically, like not just sort of a task focused conversation, like a bit of a well-being conversation as well. And obviously some people, like, you know, they don't want to bring that into the workplace, and it's not a conversation they want to have, and ultimately that's their choice. But I think just having that invitation to have those kind of conversations, and I think the other, and having it be like a fixed point, not rather than sort of responding necessarily to, you know, you feel like somebody looks like they're struggling, because you're right, you can't always tell, you know, some people it's quite visible when they're struggling, but for other people it's really hidden, and you don't know until, you know, they've phoned in sick because they can't come in anymore, and they, you know, they've sort of hit that wall. And I think the other thing I find really helpful, again, I know it sort of depends on the workplace and the sort of, so it's hard to give a very general answer, but I know I find having team meetings very helpful, and having a bit of space in those team meetings for people to, you know, ask how each other are doing, and to have that sort of peer support. And also I think having a kind of culture where it's okay for us to say that we're struggling, you know, personally or with our work. You know, we don't go into it all in massive depths, but just being able to acknowledge that that is something that's happening, rather than having to sort of present a facade of, you know, I'm fine and I don't have any troubles with my work or my life, and just being able to be open that, you know, it's okay not to be like 100% all of the time. and to acknowledge that to each other.
Yeah.
So I find helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because personally, I think if someone was just kind of say, like, as you say, when someone's like, oh, how are you? You have like, yeah, I'm good, thanks, how are you? It's just like the automatic response. But actually, if someone was to say, oh, at 2 o'clock on Thursday, we're going to be talking about how you really are, then I kind of probably like, right, okay, well, how, it would give you a chance to kind of look inwards, and then also like think like, I'm one of these people that rehearse everything that I'm going to say to someone before I say it to them. So I would like how to, like, hello, how are you? Oh, hello, how are you? Like, I would like rehearse it so that I felt confident in saying it, because it is sometimes just starting that conversation, which is the difficult bit. And then once you've kind of crossed that line, it flows better. So actually sometimes doing a bit of both, because different people are different, maybe just springing it on some people is what some people need, but actually having it scheduled in is maybe the kind of support that some people do need as well.
Yeah, and like you say, they can prepare the points, that the main points they would like to get across to you, and in how they want to say it to you, because some people, they're not comfortable being like totally vulnerable, especially in the workplace, and you know, it's about respecting that. I would also say as well, I think like so it just occurred to me, I think it's really important that I feel like my managers like set an example in terms of being able to show a bit of vulnerability, and that really helps me to be able to sort of do that, you know. So they'll acknowledge, if, you know, like at the moment with everything that's been going on, they've acknowledged things are difficult. So it feels easier for us to acknowledge that it's difficult. Like I know we had it was like at one point a bit of a breakthrough in the team, I think, where I think somebody said, you know, I'm so exhausted doing everything on Zoom. And I think it was before people really were acknowledging that Zoom fatigue was a thing. I think we all just felt like, why can't we do this? What's wrong with us? Why can't we get the same amount of work done, like over a video screen? But as soon as somebody said it, everybody was like, yes, me too. Like, I'm finished the day, absolutely done in. Like, what's wrong? I've been thinking it's me. So yeah, just having those spaces for everybody to say, oh, this is really hard, is really important, and it just makes you feel better, because it just all takes out the part where you just think, you know, there's something wrong with you for not being able to do something.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Hayley. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you so much for delivering that session. I think it's been really useful and very thought-provoking, like Lorraine said. Hopefully you've all found it very useful, and thanks so much for coming along. As I said at the start, it is part of a series. One has already happened, but it is available on our YouTube channel, so if you did miss it and want to go back and view it, you can. And also, if there's anyone that you think could benefit from viewing these sessions, please do feel free to share the link, the YouTube link with them as well. Our next session is taking place on the 5th of August, and it is looking at habit and habit formation. So please do, it's on our website, so you can book on already, and hopefully see you all then too. So thank you for coming. Take care, stay safe, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.